Before this beautiful gift of life was received, there was a long journey, a journey of learning, patience, discipline, hope, some pain, a lot of unknowns, and most importantly, an abundance of love, determination, and support. The journey began in July of 2016, while on a summer road trip from California to Washington with my son Frankie. We had never been to Crater Lake, Oregon, and I heard so much about the wonderful blue waters. Hiking was a way of life for us, so a few switchbacks and before you know it, Frankie and I were walking along the beach of this visual wonder. On the way back up, I noticed Frankie gaining distance on me. This was a little difficult to swallow considering I always led and guided us, but that day was unlike any other. I huffed and puffed. I realized it wasn't the altitude. It wasn't the fact that it was steep. I recognized I was sucking wind because something was off with me. Specifically, my lungs. I'm normally reluctant to visit doctors or make medical appointments or to even consider hearing bad medical news. But this was way out of the ordinary. This reasoning is typical of men, but I knew whatever was making my breathing difficult needed some attention. After completing some testing, I found out I had some scarring in my lungs. Nothing significant, so we thought, but worth acknowledging. The diagnosis was that I could have been exposed to asbestos while in the military, or I may have had pneumonia that had gone untreated in the past. Regardless, the lungs were scarred and irreparable. There was nothing to treat, just monitor to see if there was any change from that day moving forward. Fast forward to December of 2021. While waiting to be discharged from the hospital for having exasperated lungs and a decreased oxygen level of 60, I decided to break the silence about my lung issue. I knew it would take an army of prayer warriors to help me through this part of my journey. Time and scarring had taken a toll on my lungs that were operating at 65%. Doctors suggested that I consider getting on a transplant list. The thought had crossed my mind since the day I was told the scarring would get worse, but I never thought it would come to that day. Lung transplant? New lungs? All of this was alien to me. This was some high-tech stuff I had seen on TV, but would soon be considering. To get on the list, I had to go through numerous tests, CT scans, x-rays, and blood work to establish that I was even healthy and worthy to apply for a lung transplant. It took months to accomplish all these things, but not without some struggles. Some examples of those struggles were fasting and having blood drawn often, filling as many as 20 vials in one session, doing a pH test and wearing a tube down my nose, down my throat, and into my belly for 24 hours, a heart catheter where a line runs from my neck to my heart chamber and from my wrist to my other heart chamber. I literally looked like someone shot me in the neck when I got out of that procedure. There were many times I was drained afterward and felt and looked like I got hit by a runaway train. You definitely don't look like a typical patient when you experience these things. I'm sure while I had these procedures done and walked out, I looked like some kind of medical experiment. Some of that time I was working, and the remainder of the time I went on short-term disability. I was diagnosed with interstitial lung disease, an autoimmune disease that would progressively scar my lungs to the point of failure. By May the 9th of 2022, I was on the lung transplant list. It was such a relief to know that 5 months of testing was finally going to pay off. Upon making the transplant list, I was given a score that helps determine how long I have to wait to possibly receive donor lungs. The scarring progressed rapidly. My lungs were just hanging on. My body was retaining too much carbon dioxide, which bound my time on Earth. Because of the downward spiral, my lung capacity decreased to a bleak 33%. Although it was bad news, it increased my score and moved me up on the list. I'm a very active person, always on the go, always working on something. So when my function became limited because of my lung capacity, it was humbling to say the least. If I wanted to go anywhere, I had to be mindful of my oxygen use. I can say this now, but at the time it wasn't spoken. The last week before my transplant could have easily been my last week among my family and friends. It's easy to get discouraged and wrapped up in the waiting period, but I kept my mind busy, accepting all the prayers being lifted up for me, listening to and reading all the encouraging words people were sharing. There was strength in numbers. I chose not to lay down and be defeated. I chose to keep on trucking and fight, despite how dark and far the outcome seemed. On May 28th, less than 3 weeks after making the list, I got the call from the transplant team and accepted the donor offer for a May 29th surgery. Once at the hospital and while in preparation, I'd still not accepted what was about to happen. My memory retreated. I don't recall going into the surgery room. I don't even remember being put to sleep. I imagine that was my body's response to shut out certain things. As dark as it may sound, I believe it was my body's way of selecting memories in the event I would never wake again. In my journey, I never considered the stress I have put my loved ones through. I never did it purposely, but anyone who cares or loves me endured some suffering of my health and outcome. Perhaps many felt defeat. Maybe some weren't as confident as I have been. Death was never really an option for me, although it very well could have happened. I didn't allow that fear to enter my heart. But not everyone is like me. And perhaps being on the outside and looking in, especially looking at me struggling, would have painted a different picture. I know I felt like crap, so I must have looked like crap. Many have said I was looking gray and lacked my brown skin color. I'm sure that can be intimidating to some, especially if they are used to seeing me a certain way. Others mention how I wasn't able to complete a sentence without having to clear my throat, pause for air, or cough. I had done that so often, it was just something I did to survive. Others may have been used to seeing me heavier, more built, and broader, but I knew because of the significant decline in lung function that my body would thank me for being slimmer, lighter, and healthier. It's easier to move a light and leaner body than a heavy-set, unhealthy body. I did what I had to do to survive. It's hard to explain what 33% lung capacity looks like without a visual. My tired lungs kept me alive through my last week prior to my transplant. Compared to the hearty donor lungs I received, it becomes obvious just how bad a shape my lungs were in. A very special thanks to my donor who gave so that I may live. God works miracles, and several occurred during this time. God kept my exhausted lungs working long enough for the timing of the transplant. On the morning of my transplant, my right lung was removed and the donor lung was sewn in and observed for almost an hour to ensure all was well and I wasn't bleeding. An hour didn't seem like much to me, who was sleeping, but to everyone else who was waiting patiently for an update, may have felt like an eternity. Next, my left lung went in. It also was sewn in and observed. In total, 9 hours passed. One by one, they were arranged in me, performing optimally with the guidance of the surgical and nursing staff. Just one day after my transplant, I was no longer intubated and was breathing on my own and walking. My chest was in pain. and I had not yet been able to enjoy that deep, full breath I had been longing for. But God bless, I was breathing on my own, when just 2 days prior I was maxed out on oxygen at home. God, prayer, perseverance, and donor lungs saved me. I don't want to sound like it's been rainbows and butterflies the whole time. There's been some issues. One of them's been my sternum. It's almost been a year, and it still hasn't healed completely. Medications that have induced type 2 diabetes. Medications that have made some of my hair fall out. But in the end, it's a small price to pay for new lungs. I've learned to trust in God's timing. He got me through the lengthy process of getting on the list, waiting for donor lungs to become available, and the actual success of the transplant. 6 years later from when the journey began, and I have a new outlook on life. New lungs, new life. But the journey doesn't end here. It's only the beginning. I still have work to do, things to see, imagery to capture and share with the world, stories to tell, experiences to be had, and lives to inspire. An organ donor saved my life. I never realized what that entailed until I actually needed it. And now that I've received it, it makes a world of difference. I'm here because of my donor. I surrendered to God's timing. Life is precious. Live like there's no tomorrow. Love extravagantly. Be of service to your people, and the world will be a better place because of you.